Hello and welcome. Today I wanted to shoot a review of this, which is the Xenopixel Saber core from LGT or Damiensabers. Now this is the same Saber core that you're going to be dealing with when you're dealing with any of their distributors like Mystic Knights or Outer Rim or Crimson Dawn or Vire or Darkwolf. So anytime you see anything labeled as Xenopixel, this is what you're dealing with in terms of the board. Now that said, you're not necessarily dealing with exactly this setup. Installs can vary. I have seen some installs of the Xenopixel board that have accent LEDs on the top that come on without the presence of a blade. So installations vary sometimes from run to run, but the basic features of the board and the basic setup of the board is going to be the same. So this little purple guy right here is the Xenopixel board. Let me go ahead and walk you through some of the setup in the core itself, and then we'll start looking at the features, the programmability, the performance, and all of that. So within these boards, this core setup is designed to fit into virtually any of the sabers that are made by LGT or Damiensabers. It's a 1-inch outer diameter. This specific one has a C-type USB connector. Now, not all of them have these. The Xenopixel sometimes has that round barrel version. So depending on the hilt that you have, if it's got an opening, a slant for a C-type, like this one does right here, or if it's got a barrel like this one does right here, you have to get the board that matches that sort of hilt design. The C-type will work in the ones that have the holes for the barrels, but the barrels will not work in the ones that have the slots for the C-type. All right, now I know that's kind of complicated, but slotty thing versus roundy thing. All right, so it's available with different connections. It connects in your Saber either by being pulled up by these two set screws here. You'll see that this one, the C-types, don't have the set screws there because none of the C-type Sabers actually connect that way. But some of them have the screws right here that pull the board or pull the button up into the Saber. Others have the screw in the back where that sort of long headless screw, let me get this here, this guy right here, this one comes up through the back and pushes the buttons into place, and then this is a spot for a little pointy set screw. So in all of these cases, when you screw it in, this button and the USB rise up into the Saber so that it's flush with the outside of the Saber. You can see here that we've got an SD card here. They provide these with a little USB SD card reader that goes in your computer, so they give you the ability to get into this card, and I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. But otherwise, the setup on this is pretty much the same. This is designed as an intermediary step between their base-lit boards and their more expensive, customizable Profi boards. Sometimes you'll find Golden Harvest boards. This is an intermediary step. This is the successor to the Eco NeoPixel board, and it does a lot more than the Eco NeoPixel board ever did. The Eco NeoPixel board locked you into very specific presets. This one has a lot of customization, but not nearly as much as some of those higher-end boards. So let me go ahead and install this into a Saber, and then we'll fire it up, and I'll go over some of the features of it. All right, so slides right into the Saber. Put that little set screw in there. And then as I put this longer screw in, you will see the buttons that are currently recessed there push themselves up to be flush with the rest of the Saber. Okay, but when that stops screwing in, the button is flush with the Saber, or with the outside of the Saber now. Now there's something that I would add about installation, which is something I've come to notice about all of the NeoPixel cores that I've had from Damiensabers or LGT, and that is that the pins on these take a light touch. A lot of times you're used to being able to put the blade in as far as you can and sort of provide a decent amount of tension and then tighten it down. With these, it has to be kind of almost barely touching, which is not really a problem. or just slightly depressed, but it's not really a problem as long as you're not dealing with like a 7/8 inch with an adapter. Then the connection can get a little bit janky. But for the most part, just don't jam it in as far as you would with a lot of other installations. Just put it in until the pins push down a little bit and then tighten it and you're good to go. All right, so after installing the board, the Saber is in deep sleep mode. You can tell the LED right here on this button is not lit. Currently, this thing is not draining anything from the battery, so this is how you want to keep it when you're not using it. In order to wake it up, I hold this button down until the Saber tells me that it's awake and the button starts to glow.
Power on.
Okay. Now it's in standby. Now the problem with standby mode is that there are gesture commands on this thing. So if you're carrying it around a convention center or something like that in standby mode, certain movements that you make might accidentally trigger things like turning the Saber on, playing sounds, or changing your sound font. So if you're not actually using it, you have to put it into deep sleep. You do that by holding down this button for 10 seconds. Unfortunately, one of the things I don't particularly care for about this model as it exists right now is that in order to do that, I end up having to change the sound font unless I turn the Saber on and turn it straight off from there. I'll get to that in a second. But holding that button for 10 seconds,
Darkness.
it changed my sound font after a few flashes, and now it's off. All right, so in order to get it into deep sleep from standby, you have to change the sound font. Let me wake it back up again.
Power on.
All right, while it's in standby here, it's susceptible to gesture triggers. We can turn it on by tapping the button. Also, it can change our sound font or change our blade styles. Another thing about this is you can't change the blade styles or the animations on the Saber while the Saber is on. You have to do that while it's off. So this button right here, depending on how long I hold it down, it's going to start flashing. All the commands are about holding it down to a specific number of flashes. So if I just hit the button, the Saber comes on. If I hold it down for one flash, it's going to go into the volume settings. And there are 3 volume settings: high, medium, low, and then there's a mute. So one flash is going to get me to volume settings. 2 flashes is going to change the blade effect. So if I want to cycle between flame blade or rainbow blade or steady blade or unstable or whatever, it's 2 flashes. 3 flashes gets me into a different type of blade effect, and that's the different sorts of ignitions and a couple weird things like blaster and ghost blade that I'll talk about in a little bit. 4 flashes changes the font, and anything past 4 flashes is working towards that 10 seconds to turn it off. All right, so I'll show you those after I've shown you the blade walk through a little bit while it's turned on. If I tap this one time, the blade's going to come on. While the blade is on, there's a limited number of effects that I can perform. There's a blaster, which I get by tapping the button. There's a lockup, which I get by holding the button and clashing. There's a force, which I get by holding the button and twisting. Unfortunately, I cannot trigger the force effect on this right now because there is a gesture setting for twist that makes the twist do something different. So I'll talk about that again in a second. But there's a blaster, a lockup, a force effect, and a color cycle. I can get into the color wheel and change the color of the blade while it's on. All right, so let me go ahead and show you those. Okay, I have a red blade here, so a tap, blasters, okay, holding it down and clashing, blade lockup. I just released the button to get out of blade lockup. I've got my swings, I've got my clashes. Okay, the force effect I can't show you, as I mentioned. If I hold down the button, now I'm in color cycle. Okay, the color cycle you can't really control. It cycles through colors, and when you find what you want, you click on it, and it stays that color. So let's wait for something good here. That'll work. All right, so I've got kind of a bluish green. All right, so the color cycle allows you to change the color of the blade. One of the things that I would mention is if you're going with a white blade, the effects like the blasters and the blade lockup are always white. So if you have a white blade, you can't see those. If you have anything else, you can. If I hold down the button longer than that, it powers off. All right, so those are the button commands on this. The gesture commands on it, there are 3. There's only one mentioned in the guidebook, or not guidebook, instruction book for this, but there are 3. You can set this to twist on and off, you can set this to stab on and off, and you can set it to swing on. Right now, I think all 3 settings for on were triggered on this. The twist off and the stab off are on there. So let me go ahead and just, there we go. Didn't have to hit the button for that. And twist off. Okay, so with the force effect that I was talking about earlier, you have to hold the button and twist. If I do that, oh, now I'm in color cycle. Okay, I'm just as likely to turn the blade off or enter some other type of setting. So the settings can, or the motion settings can get a little bit weird with the button settings. All right, the other motion settings, when this thing is off, if I give it a twist rotation, it turns itself on. But theoretically, if I give it a twist rotation when that setting of twist on is not active, I can sometimes still get it to work here.
Hello there.
There we go. I can change the sound font. All right, blade up. There we go, is music. Music plays in the background while the font's going. And I turn it off with a twist. So various settings with the twist and the buttons, and it can get a little bit confusing because you're trying to run it all through one button and a twist mechanic. So now let me show you some of the blade styles because I've been doing everything with a solid blade. All right, if I hold down the button again for 2 flashes.
Pulse.
Okay, now I'm on a pulse blade. Okay, you can see it sort of wibbling there.
Rainbow blade.
Rainbow blade. Now the rainbow blade on this is actually pretty good. It's kind of an unstable, wavy rainbow as opposed to just a gradient.
Candy blade.
Candy blade is especially gruesome. You can't really see that too well, but very flashy, kind of like a Vegas crawl, but rainbow colors cycling in small increments.
Unstable.
Here's the unstable blade. Okay, now the unstable version that they have is a very erratic flicker. It doesn't have any waves or anything to it like a lot of other unstables. It's just an erratic, sort of randomized flicker.
Fire blade.
Their fire blade is what a lot of other companies call the unstable blade. It's got that wave to it, but what it does not have is a lot of things that I'm used to on the fire blade. I'm used to a mix of colors so that you have like white or lighter colors towards the bottom that darken as they wave up. So usually with a fire blade you have like a white and a yellow and an orange and a red that sort of wave up. This fire blade is just a wave, so it's just a flicker like a fire, but it doesn't really have that color variety.
Steady.
Steady blade is where we were before with just a solid blade. All right, so those are the presets on the blade type. Okay, the other presets that we have available to us, if we hold the button for 3, we're going to go to the blade style, I guess. What do they call that? I'm not exactly certain what the menu calls it, but blade type or blade mode or something like that. Most of these are ignitions. You've been noticing that when I hit the button to turn this on, it goes up a little bit, and then it goes whoop, and then hits up the rest. That's an ignition style. So let me go ahead and cycle through some of those.
Phaser ignition.
Phaser ignition.
Standard blade. Blaster blade.
Okay, blaster blade is more than just an ignition. Blaster blade is actually kind of funky because when I turn it on, there's nothing. Blaster blade is for the blaster deflect. So in theory, if I had a saber as a blaster, I could go pa-pew, pa-pew, pa-pew. All right, so depending on your prop setup, that could actually be kind of cool. But yeah, you just hit the button and you get blasts.
Ghost blade.
Ghost blade is interesting because it has an accelerometer in here, I believe, that determines how fast the saber is moving for the smooth swings. This uses that to trigger the blade as well. So in Ghost Blade, if my blade is still, I have no light. If I start moving it a little, I start getting a little bit of light. If I start going quickly with it, it lights all the way up, and then it stops. So Ghost Blade is an interesting setting. I hadn't really seen that one before.
Broken ignition.
Broken ignition.
Stack ignition. Photon ignition.
Okay, now we're back to photon. Oh.
Warp ignition.
Warp ignition is where I was before. So positive sides on this board. The board has a lot of functionality. There's a lot of different presets in here. There's the ability to hold a lot of sound fonts. That puts it far and away above a lot of base models that are offered either by the same company or by other companies out there that maybe give you like 4 sound fonts or something like that. 30 some odd sound fonts with the ability to add more because you can take your own sound fonts and put them on this board. That's nice. That puts it on par with a lot of the premium levels in the industry. A lot of the features that it has, like the ability to customize the blade styles and the ignition and the color wheel. While some of that is a little bit clunky, the fact that it has all that ability and can actually do the wild things like the rainbow blade or the candy blade, that is a really nice thing to have in a board. Negatives on this. So far, the interface is a little bit clunky. For instance, in order to cycle through sound fonts, you have to cycle one direction through all 34 sound fonts. So if you're at the sound font that you like and you accidentally switch it trying to put the Saber in standby, you got to cycle through all 30 some odd of the other sound fonts before you can get back to it. And that means either doing that twist with it and running the risk of turning the Saber on if twist ignition is on, or holding down the button for 4 flashes 30 some odd times. So the font navigation, because it's one directional, is a little bit clunky. Also on the downside, some of the animations are not up to par, like the Fireblade and the Unstable really could use a lot of work. So the fact that there's some features in here that are still a little bit of a work in progress, that's definitely a downside. The fact that you can turn everything on and confuse yourself and get the gesture commands messed up with the other gesture commands like force effect is still a little bit of an issue as well. The good news is that this thing is updatable. Some of those features you can turn on and off yourself by going into the memory card using the provided USB stick. Things like twist on or swing on or stab on can be turned on and off. You can also adjust the preset color that comes with any of the sound fonts so that it goes to the right color when you turn it up and you don't have to wait through the color wheel, which is also a little bit awkward. So some of that stuff you can do yourself on the board. Others of it you can't. Unlike a lot of premium level boards, you cannot actually edit or customize the blade styles themselves. They're locked in with the firmware. The good news is that the firmware is going to be updated relatively regularly. The people at Damiensabers told me they're planning on like once a month or so. So what that means is if it comes to their attention that their flame blade is substandard, they can fix it, release it with a firmware update. You can take your memory card out, get that firmware update, and have the new blade styles. That's where some of the weirder stuff like the candy blade came in firmware updates. So the fact that you're not locked into the mistakes of the past, like you are with a lot of boards, that's nice. The fact that you have to wait for them to come up with the update, that's maybe not so nice. But the takeaway is that you get a lot of functionality, you get the ability to update, you got a lot of flexibility, and you got a lot of features. Not as many as you can get on a Profi board, but everything's on board, everything's preset, so you don't have to learn how to code and connect to Arduino in order to make this thing work. You have a lot more settings and options than the base lid. So this is a nice way station between the premium model and the basic model. This does pretty much everything that most people are going to need a NeoPixel to do, which I think is what they were going for with it. All right, so this has been the Xenopixel Saber core from LGT/Damiensabers. Hopefully this has given you a good look at what this does and whether or not it might be right for you. If it has, join me back next time and I'll see you then.